Welcome back. Well, today I am joined by Dr. William Wu, who is here on behalf of Kaiser Permanente, Orange County. Well, Dr. Wu, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, I know we've had you in studio before, and like we were talking off camera, we hope that that's going to be sooner rather than later. But for now, thank goodness we have this means. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to do anything. So it's sort of a blessing in disguise.
Looking forward to the day when we can be back in studio. Love to talk to your audience live from there.
Perfect. So for the last year, there have been many challenges, needless to say. Although people who have diabetes have a little bit increased challenges, primarily because I believe that was one of the comorbidities that were discussed.
Absolutely. A lot's been going on in the COVID environment with diabetes, as with every other condition. Healthcare has been difficult to navigate at some points with shutdowns of elective surgeries and everything like that. Diabetes was not immune to the effects of COVID-19. We've seen three main themes having to do with diabetes throughout the COVID pandemic. So first, as you mentioned, there is a risk of increase for severe COVID-19 infections in diabetic patients. Second, we saw a lot of development of diabetes, specifically in many of the patients that have had COVID. And finally, in terms of control rates for diabetes nationwide. So, diving into that, I think early on we realized that we were looking at the population of patients that got hospitalized for COVID. So these are folks with severe COVID infections, and we were trying to find commonalities. Why did they get sick and their neighbor didn't get as sick? And it turns out that 25% of the patients that were hospitalized early on in the pandemic had diabetes. That prompted places like the CDC and the World Health Organization to say, whoa, if you have diabetes, you may have an increased risk of getting a severe infection or being hospitalized with COVID-19. And we're still not 100% sure why this is. We think it has something to do with baseline inflammation that happens with diabetes, or perhaps it's decrease in immune system efficiency and functioning with diabetes. Regardless, we're still seeing those patients with diabetes have an increased risk of getting severe infection. Second thing I had noted was that we're seeing many, many more diabetic patients now. So people that did not have diabetes, got COVID, ended up in the hospital, and when they leave the hospital, they leave with diabetes. In fact, we found that 14% of hospitalized patients that did not have diabetes end up subsequently developing diabetes. So another complication that we're still learning about and trying to figure out if there's anything we can do to mitigate that. Finally, go ahead.
I'm sorry, that's so unusual because I mean, gosh, is that something you've never heard of? Is that someone gets an ailment, some sort of an ailment, and then all of a sudden they have diabetes? I mean, like you said, the inflammation, but is there anything other than that might be related?
Sure, and they're still testing these things, but we do have some idea of why this might be going on. One, we know that with COVID infection and with other very severe diseases, your body has to put all of its energy into fighting this disease, and things like the endocrinological system, your ability to manage your sugars, your ability to do all of that is lessened, because all of those resources are taken to combat the COVID and to help you recover. A second piece of that, I would say, is actually some of the medications we use to save your life in COVID. I had the opportunity to run a COVID service in our hospital. And one of the key measures that came out throughout the pandemic that actually has been shown to save lives is use of steroid medication. Right. This is a medication like prednisone or solumedrol, very common across the nation now. It's part of why we're seeing death rates decrease from COVID-19 in the hospital. But those medications are actually known to increase your blood sugar. So let's say you're pre-diabetic beforehand, you put your body through all of this stress, we increase your blood sugars with the medications, which need to be done, right? We want to save your life. We don't want you to ending up on a ventilator or something like that. Right. But as a consequence, we're seeing more diabetes on the back end.
So now, but this is not necessarily diabetes that they will have for life, though, is it?
Well, in that 14%, it is. Now, we're going to work very aggressively to keep that controlled so it doesn't affect your life in a significant manner. And yes, you probably have to live healthier, eat healthier, get more exercise when you're back on your feet. So it's something that can be controlled and managed, as opposed to, an acute COVID, severe pneumonia where, it's life or death. So I think, taking the lesser of the two evils here is surviving. And yes, you'll have an increased risk of COVID on the back, of diabetes on the back end. But that is something we can manage. And if we do a good job at it, it may not impact your life significantly.
Wow. Well, that's interesting information. I had not heard of that. And of course, you're just now over time sort of realizing this. And this is what they're finding across the world. Is that correct?
That's right. The initial data that we saw came from China, but quickly we started getting data from the European countries, from the United States, and we're still learning more about this. Many, many studies are being conducted to help us understand exact mechanisms of what's going on, continuing to evolve our treatments, and that's what's really happened. We've had this rapid learning with COVID. Patients are now surviving more than before, less people being admitted to the ICU on ventilators. So I think we're going to continue to learn. And hopefully with the rollout of vaccines and the precautions that everyone's been doing, like you said, hopefully my colleagues and I can be back in studio with you next month.
You touched on a couple of the things that you're doing during this vulnerable time. So for instance, obviously, most people here are doing their social distancing and the masks and all of those things. And the medical offices, who I've talked to a number of different people, talk about, they're following CDC. I think we're safer in the hospital now than ever before because of all the protocols that go into place. But then here's an interesting thing that you have here about the increase in virtual care, which we know sort of very early on that was something that had to happen. So how has Kaiser Permanente sort of evolved using that?
Absolutely. So like you said, our number one priority is the safety and well-being of our patients. We cannot have our patients come in and get sick when they're here seeing us. So one avenue which we've greatly increased by necessity and by patient demand, of course, is virtual care. Being able to interact and get your healthcare from your physician, not only the, hey, I fell and hurt my elbow kind of thing, but also the chronic disease management, things that you have to do on an ongoing basis, like diabetes, like blood pressure. We need to be able to do this in an effective manner. So we've greatly increased our ability and capacity to provide safe, quality care through telephone visits, through video visits. We've increased our capacity to do online education. Before, we had a robust educational program for our diabetics. We had them come into auditoriums, have programs with nutritionists, dietitians. We're still providing all of that. We actually moved to a lot of the technology that universities will use to educate students remotely. We use the same platforms so we can help educate and facilitate better health for our members. We have all of our, not just doctors, but ancillary staff on virtual care as well. So, for example, we have diabetic care managers. These are certified diabetic educators that will connect with our patients, help them monitor their blood sugars, adjust medications, give them advice and tips on how to live healthier so they can live longer lives free of comorbidities from diabetes. I would say a couple extra pieces of technology that have really proliferated during COVID-19 include our remote glucose monitoring. So I know a lot of our diabetic patients, they have these little machines where they're checking their blood sugars constantly. They used to come into our doctor's offices and we download those meters and get the blood sugars and assist our members in adjusting their medications appropriately. Well, now we're doing that all remotely. It can be done through your smartphone and it will transmit all those numbers to your doctor and care managers. So now we can keep you safe over the phone or through video without you having to even leave your home and be exposed to anything. So whatever we can do to keep our members safe and healthy, we're moving towards it.
Well, and it's also an efficiency thing too, which is kind of interesting. I mean, it's sort of a catch-22. I'd love to have you here in the studio, but of course that's not going to happen. However, in the future, let's say you didn't have an hour to devote to come here to the studio, but you had 15 minutes. Well, you run to your office, you have the Zoom with me for 15 minutes, and you run back to what you were going to do. So in that case, here you have patients who can do their blood sugar check, they can send the information, and they're done, right? So, I mean, it's an efficient thing.
Bottom line, we need to meet our patients where they're at. You know, like you say, if they're busy, if we're busy, we need to find a way to connect efficiently and using high quality measures to keep their diabetes and health under control.
Of course, it doesn't replace the in-person human touch type thing, which I think we're really clamoring for these days. So absolutely. You never know, you'll be getting a lot more in office visits. You never know.
And it has to happen, especially for chronic diseases like diabetes. There's some certain screenings we must do to ensure your health. For example, eye screening. Diabetic patients are at higher risk for eye damage due to diabetes. So in all of our offices in Orange County, we have a camera that will take a digital photo of your retina, and we actually have an eye specialist review those and look for any signs of diabetic damage. We do this on every 1 to 2 year basis. Oh. We're checking people's feet. We make sure that they still have sensation, good circulation, no wounds that need to be addressed, and we do that frequently. So yes, I believe there is going to be a role to come back into their offices and work with your doctors. So I would say a few things to that. One, if your doctor's office calls you and says, hey, look, we really need you to come in, it's important for your health, please know that your doctors are thinking about your health. They've instituted all of the precautions that you had mentioned earlier, everything from social distancing, masking, hand sanitizer all over the place, temperature checking, symptom screening, isolating. I'll tell you, my waiting room, we removed a great portion of the chairs. You cannot sit within 6 feet of someone else. We don't want anyone getting sick in our offices. All of our staff have the appropriate PPE on, so patients will be safe. If we call you to come in, please come in. We'll make sure that and ensure your safety. After your vaccine, hopefully many of your viewers are getting vaccinated, especially our diabetic patients. Again, because they're at higher risk for severe infection, the CDC went ahead and made diabetics a priority category for getting vaccinated. So hopefully many of your viewers that are diabetics have already done so. Once you're vaccinated, check in with your doctor. See if you do need to come in at this point, now that you have even added security and safety from the COVID vaccine.
Right. Well, thank you so much for the information. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll have you in here in the studio soon.
Oh, thank you. Well, I know we're pressed for time, but could I mention one additional resource I really love for members?
Of course.
Oh, awesome. One thing that we have at Kaiser Permanente, and I have seen proliferate in the community recently, has been wellness coaches. And a lot of times that's over the phone. You can get wellness coaching, because we all know during the pandemic, a lot of us had decreased physical activity, not going out to get the same exercise. The gyms have been closed. Maybe our eating habits haven't been the same because we're using new things like Uber Eats, or we've stocked up our home with quite a bit of food and supplies, and maybe they're not the healthiest. I think this is a great opportunity for wellness coaches to get in there and kind of help you to prioritize what's healthy for you, help you get a little bit more of that physical activity in a safe way, help you make better food choices. Yeah. I'd mentioned that at Kaiser Permanente, it's free for our members. I know other insurance companies have engaged with various services as well. In fact, for our members, our services are open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday, and they need only call our toll-free number. Do you mind if I give it to your viewers?
Oh, go right ahead.
Excellent. So for our KP members, that's 866-862-4295, and you can get set up with your own wellness coach for free.
Perfect. Well, again, thank you. I love all the information, and the residents will be very happy to know all of it. So thank you.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
All right. And we'll be right back after this.